Every decision we make in our life, we use a cost-benefit analysis. We especially use this when deciding on who to vote for political office, or if we should vote at all. There are both costs and benefits to voting, and it's different for each person. This means it might be rational for one person to vote, while another person to not vote. Most people understand the benefits of voting. You get to participate in the political process, as for centuries, many people were not allowed because of dictators and kings in charge that never allowed for democracy. But today in our constitutional republic, we have a little more say in our political process. We can vote for people who have the same ideas as us. We can criticize the people who have different ideas than us, and we can debate on topics. Another reason is that people believe it's a civic duty for us to vote. So many people have died just to be heard, to get a say in government. And we have to vote not only for ourselves, but for those people that never got a chance and died for our right to get a chance to vote. Like I said, the benefits are quite obvious. We now have some sort of say in how the people are governed. Especially with our checkered past on the matter, it definitely seems like we should take advantage of this opportunity. The cost of voting comes into the friction that is created when you decide to vote, and the first hurdle is registering to vote. Many governments are very inefficient. It is quite difficult to actually make a governmental system that is efficient, and this makes programs just run slow and just not work well at all, and this is the case with registering to vote. Each state has their own unique way of registering to vote, and because of this, it's just very different between the different states, and if you decide to switch parties, well, more paperwork to fill out and more complications. It's just very time consuming and tedious. Another cost of voting is the time it takes to actually learn the candidates and their positions. Most people don't have time to learn the candidates' platforms, and then not only take their platforms, but then compare them to their opponents. And then on top of that, find out what their beliefs are, and find out what the controversial topics and what their stance is, and then rank those on how passionate they are, and then compare that to what political candidate is best for them. It's just time consuming, and it's a lot of work, and it's very frustrating and stressful, especially with a lot of misinformation and who said what. It's just very confusing. And that's why most people just don't do that. Most people will actually just find out what topic they're most passionate about, find out which political candidate sides with their view on that topic, and they vote that way. And this is actually way easier to do and less time intensive. It really cuts down on the costs of voting. And so that's why a lot of people do it. And in fact, you become a rational, ignorant voter when you do this because you're only voting on the one position of that political candidate. It's actually very rational to be quite ignorant about politics. It's very time consuming and you have to keep up with it. So instead of that, just purposely don't follow it, It's very rational just to ignore it completely and just who cares. Another tax for voting is the shoe rubber tax. And what this is basically the transportation tax that it takes to get to the voting booth. So this is either the gas in your car or the energy it takes when you're riding your bike there or the actual shoe rubber from walking to the voting booth. In addition to that cost, there's also the cost of what you'd have to sacrifice or the opportunity cost of voting. So not only did you have to, spend the shoe rubber to get to the voting booth, but now you may have also had to take a day off of work just to wait in line to go ahead and vote. Because in the United States, voting for political elections is not a national holiday. So most people have to take off of work on that day, which means that not only did they have to spend money on gas or walk there and spend energy, but they also now lost the amount of money they would make working that day. Now, just to clarify about the shoe rubber tax is that there will never be no shoe rubber tax. There will always be some sort of cost into voting. Even if we somehow were able to vote on our phones, the energy it takes just to open up the app and click on the candidate that we want, that's still some sort of energy that we have to spend to vote. So there is always going to be a tax, just some activities have more than others. Now, to do a cost-benefit analysis on voting, we have to look at this equation called the voter turnout equation. Now, what this is it will tell us what the probability of a voter will turn up to actually vote at the voting booth. The probability that a voter will turn up to the voting booth is equal to the probability that their vote will change the outcome of the election times the benefit they gain from their candidate winning minus the costs of voting. If the probability of that is greater than 0, then the voter will turn up to vote. If it's less, the voter won't vote because that means the costs outweigh the benefits of voting. Now, how likely is your vote to change the outcome of the election? Not at all, actually. In fact, the more people that vote, the less likely that your vote will change the outcome of the election. Especially the way that our government is set up, being a constitutional republic and not an actual democracy, we have even less say, and the probability of our vote actually changing the outcome of the election is zero. It will never happen, ever. Now, how likely is your vote to change the outcome of the election? There's only two ways that this can happen. One is that if your vote allows your candidate to win by exactly one vote, or your vote enforces a tie between the two candidates. Those are the only two scenarios where your vote actually matters. In every other scenario, if you didn't vote, the outcome still would have been exactly the same. Based on this, the probability that your vote actually changes the election in something like the big presidential elections, it will never happen. Your vote will never change the outcome of the election, which means rationally, you shouldn't vote, because why does it matter? There are no benefits. There are only costs to voting. And yet after that, where millions of people will only have costs and no benefits of voting, millions of people still show up to vote. This is where the previously mentioned benefits come in. They are not actual benefits to voting, but instead they're psychological benefits. This is where we think that our civic duty comes into play, or we are morally obligated to vote. What it also does is it allows us to avoid the social pressures of not voting, because everyone knows on voting day, people walk around with the I voted stickers, or they post it on their Instagram stories, and everyone sees it. And if you didn't post one, or you're not wearing the sticker, people are going to start asking questions, and there's a lot of pressure on you. Also, the smaller that the elections become, the more likely your vote would have a probability of changing the election. So if there are only 10 voters, there's quite a big probability that your vote could actually change the outcome of the election. Versus if there's hundreds of millions of voters, probably not that likely. To sum it all up, if you are voting because you want to change the outcome of the election, you're just voting for the wrong reasons. If you're voting because you think it's a civic duty and you feel good when you vote, then by all means, go ahead and vote. Some people don't see that fact and they will not vote, and that's a rational decision to them. And the people who do vote, they find benefits from it, and so therefore they vote. Neither one of them are wrong, neither one of them are right. It's just a rational decision for each individual party.